This is Ramona Thomas with Ramona's Books. I'm going to talk today about why I wrote Dr. Wizmagic's potion and how there's a connection between some aspects of my book to what doctors Mr. and Mrs. Clark did with their doll test experiment. So please listen up, and I hope you enjoy it. Hi everyone, this is Ramona Thomas. It's been a while since I've made a video, but it's been on my mind, and I got really busy during the holidays and the new year, and things have settled down a little bit, so I'm taking this opportunity to reach out to you again. So what I thought I'd do is talk about my book, Dr. Wizmagic's Potion, and let you know why I wrote it. So one day, I want to say I was in my 30s, early 30s, and I had an epiphany. And it just came to me that when I was a young girl, I thought that the brown eggs were not as good as the white eggs. I think I've shared this story with you before, but not in the detail that I'm going to give you this evening. So when that occurred, what it reminded me of was doctors Kenneth and Mamie Clark. They did a doll test experiment in the 1940s, and what they discovered was that young black children who were ages, say, 3 to 7, felt inferior. They had two dolls. They placed the dolls, and then they asked the children questions that are similar to what I'm going to share with you. I don't know what the exact questions were, so I'm just going to give you an idea. So they had the two dolls, and they would ask the child, point to the black doll. The child would point to the black doll. Now I want you to point to the white doll. And they would point to the white doll. Then the question would be, which doll is pretty? And the child would point to the doll that they thought was pretty. Which doll is bad? Like, which one has bad behavior? They would point to the doll that they thought had the bad behavior. Which doll is smart? They would point to the doll that they thought was smart. Which doll is not smart? And what ended up, they learned, doctors Mr. and Mrs. Clark, what they learned, or I should say discovered, since it was an experiment, they discovered that the black children contributed or attributed all of the positive characteristics to the white doll. The negative characteristics were attributed to the black doll. About 14 years later, after they did that experiment, I believe it was discovered by the NAACP, and say 14 years after they did the doll test, which was in the 1940s, the NAACP, or the attorneys who were fighting for the end of segregation, because separate was definitely not equal, right? So they actually used the results of Drs. and Mrs. Clark's doll test to help fight against segregation. A lot of people don't know this, or I shouldn't say that because I don't know who knows it, but what I do know is that we didn't learn about them in school. What we learned about was Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and certain other black historians and people who are significant in our history, but we have a lot of unsung heroes, and doctors and Mrs. Clark are both unsung heroes in my view. So on that day when I had the epiphany and I tied the fact that I thought the brown eggs were inferior to the white eggs, it really ties directly into the doll test in my view. So since I've written my books that are all educational, when I'm invited to schools, oftentimes, if I'm talking about Dr. Wizmagic's Potion, I typically will either read a portion of the book, or the students have already read the book, and I'm there as meet the author, and you have an opportunity to ask questions. But there's a point where I'll say, raise your hand and tell me, if you laid an egg, what color will it be? And I want to tell you that the students are primarily students who are various shades of brown. They have brown eyes, brown hair, brown skin. Some of this brown skin is very, very light brown skin, but it's brown skin. So students range from, they may be Asian, Black Americans, Hispanics, just a variety, right, of different ethnicities. And when I ask that question, I either get confused looks like, ooh, I don't know what to say, First of all, it might be confusing because, they know they can't lay an egg, number one. So that might be a little bit of the confusion. But then after you get over that, when I say, okay, but just pretend if you laid an egg, tell me what color would it be? I can't tell you how many times I've had brown students tell me that their egg would be white. So I feel like that ties into the experiment that Drs. and Mrs. Clark did, that they conducted, and that some of the issues that were prevalent at that time are still prevalent today. And maybe even more so because the imagery of people of color, particularly Black people in the media, and then now they have so much social media. There's a lot of negative imagery. So yes, we are integrated now, but that doesn't mean that much has changed in terms of how one views themselves and their self-esteem and their self-worth. So for me, it was important to, quote unquote, dispel the myth that brown is negative. And I chose to use foods. So throughout the story, the boy and his mom are selecting foods, and all the foods that they select are better for you because they're organic. And the organic foods happen to be brown. So the message is not direct. It's more subliminal, because if you read the story, you come away with not only knowing that things that are brown were better because they were organic, so healthier for you, but you also, throughout the story, are having an opportunity to see a boy and his mom look at the nutrition label. So each time they look at the nutrition label, that's reinforcing that the choice that they're about to make to choose the organic product is actually better for them. So I believe that the story is very significant, very relevant, is very important for our students and all of us, adults as well as young people, to learn to make healthier food choices. And the story is emphasizing the importance of checking the nutrition label when you're making buying decisions about what's going in your body. But at the same time, because all of the ingredients that were being selected are brown and organic, they were goods. Voila, we have something that's brown that doesn't have a negative connotation. So that was the whole point for, well, I should say that's the message that was important for me to get across. And it all started with me having this realization that at one time in my life as a child, that I thought something was wrong with the brown eggs. And I immediately, as an adult, was able to tie that into the doll test experiment by Drs. Kenneth and Mamie Clark. So I would encourage you, if you don't know about the doll test, I would encourage you to research it. You can Google Drs. Kenneth and Mamie Clark doll test experiment. You'll be able to find a lot of information about it. I would also encourage you to pick up a copy of Dr. Wizmagic's potion, because as I said, it's a great story. It has a lot of messaging. The messaging about brown being good, the messaging about making healthier food choices, and the messaging about making sure you learn to look at your nutrition label. So for me, if I'm reading the story to a younger child, say a second grader, they're hearing it. They can learn from hearing as well. And it's fully illustrated, so they have an opportunity to see the pictures. In fact, there's that part in the book that I told you about with the eggs where a choice had to be made, and the boy is asking if one type of egg is better than the other. But also, if you're a little bit older reading the story, there's a cookie recipe in the back that uses all organic products, and you have an opportunity to maybe if you have a grandchild and you want to read the story, but then you actually make the cookies. So there's just a lot that I think can benefit you and your family from reading the story, and you definitely can be benefited by learning more about doctors, Mr. and Mrs. Clark. And I feel that they are unsung heroes, that we learn so much about a lot of folks in our history, but they were game changers too. And everything that they did in the 40s is still relevant today, I think. So that's why it's important for me to share this with you now. So anyway, I want to say thank you for listening in, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon. Take care.